welcome back again to another great episode of the A to Z of Property Strategies with the Professors of Property, Mr. David Clouter.
And Mr. the Phenomenal, the Wonderful, the Incomparable Mr. Andrew Roberts.
Well, thank you very much, David. That's so kind of you. Last time we were on the peas. The time before we were on the peas. We seem to be stuck on peas.
We are, but there's nothing like mushy peas to make the day go with a smulch or whatever.
That's the word I made up. Bird's eye petit pois.
Naturellement.
So where are we up to?
We are up to P for probate.
Probate. Okay, so tell me about probate then, David.
Probate.
How can we use that as a strategy?
Well, when somebody dies, their property. First of all, the chances are that some tax is going to be due, some inheritance tax, and there may well be an heir or heirs who want to liquidate that property. So there are two reasons why the estate of a deceased might come up for sale. And in both cases, the vendor in this will be motivated, the executor, to achieve a sale, because HMRC don't like to hang around for their dues, and it will often be the case that those who are inheriting a property will already in their minds have planned what they're going to do with the money, whether it's a private education for their children or that round-the-world cruise that they always wanted, or possibly an 8-metre extension to their property, as we were talking about in one of our recent videos.
Absolutely.
So this as a property investor leaves one with scope for negotiating with the vendors of such properties, and it's another occasion where I suppose that, as the saying goes, cash is king. So if we can effect a sale faster than would normally be the case through an estate agent and advertising it and due process, then in return we're going to ask for that at a slightly lower price than might otherwise be the case.
Okay, so what we're saying is probate properties offer us an opportunity to basically secure a property perhaps a little bit cheaper because they need to sell fast with certainty, and also probably because the last time it was renovated was probably back in the 50s or 60s, possibly even the 40s. I know I bought something, it was a good few years ago, but I think it was still wartime in there from the decor.
I'm always fascinated, sorry, it's a little sideline, but I'm fascinated by sort of what comes out of these houses, and especially when you lift the carpets, you can get newspaper articles from the Suez Crisis and all kinds of stuff like that.
You absolutely can. Well, this one where it was what I described as a wartime house, where the electricity meter is, they've got an old meter book where they recorded the meter readings and paid the electricity man, who obviously must have knocked on the door.
Good Lord.
Real old stuff, but you can probably almost see them as museum pieces. But because it's a museum piece, that often means, A, there's scope to uplift the value, because not many people will buy a house that looks like it was in the 50s or 60s. Secondly, they often have original features which have been covered up by that newspaper with the Suez Crisis, and then a piece of carpet on top of that. And when you peel these back, you can often find some lovely antico flooring or some mosaic tile flooring, and you get a phenomenal building.
That's right.
You can get a lot of value and uplift the value a lot, which is why probates are quite good, aren't they, David?
Very much so. And another thing they used to do, I think that was in the 1960s and 70s, is the beautiful pine doors. First of all, by this point, they've had 20 coats of paint on them anyway, since, say, the Victorian era. And then they used to cover them with hardboard to make them into kind of completely smooth doors. But the great thing about this is that you could take the hardboard off and the door is basically there. If you're lazy like me, you then send them off to a place where they just strip them, dip them into some kind of chemical which strips the paint off. But if you've got time on your hands, you could do it with sandpaper and stuff, but and a blowtorch, but I don't recommend that.
No, but you are right. These features often get concealed and hidden. I bought a bank recently, and
As you do.
in the upper floors there were chimneys, and there were wooden boxes around the chimneys, which basically concealed fireplaces. So these things often get covered up.
I was just reminded actually of a television advert, which I think was in the 1980s, by a guy called Victor Khayyam, advertising some razor. And he said, I like this so much I bought the company. And you're saying I was so fond of my bank that I bought it.
It is actually a fact.
I know. I've been there. So, and a wonderful job, if I may say so, you've done of the conversion.
Well, thank you very much. And if you're not already a subscriber of this channel and you want to find out how the bank was built, hit that subscribe button now, because very shortly that video will be going live. So stay tuned, and it's a phenomenal property for you to tune in and see what we did and how we added significant value. It wasn't a probate, but I suppose you could describe it as a probate. It was end of life for the bank, so they got rid of it.
And there you go. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. Now, there's that expression, isn't there? Someday my prince will come. You know that one. And which brings us on to project management.
Superb. We all love a good project to manage, don't we?
Absolutely so. And Prince 2 is one of the tools that that is used by our project managers. It's a qualification they have to enable them to do all this sort of stuff. At our level in the property game, Prince 2 isn't necessarily de rigueur, although it wouldn't necessarily hurt. But by managing a project, which could be a build or a renovation or something like this, you ensure that all the materials arrive when they're supposed to, that all the trades arrive when they're supposed to, and that there are not sort of unnecessary delays where the plasterer couldn't turn up, so the sparky can't do his second fix, and so on and so forth. This is often done by means of a rather clever thing called a Gantt chart. I'm very fond of those, and they can consist of horizontal lines going across on this spreadsheet saying when the thing should start and when the thing should end, and then lower down there's another thing, and then the things that are dependent are linked up, so that you know, for example, I don't know, that you can't put the carpet down until you've got the floorboards back after the gas man's been, and just. Although a lot of these things might be very simple, with a development, for example, if you're just doing a new build, there's about 175 processes and things to do, and I've got a Gantt chart for those. And so if one or two of them go amiss, it could delay the project for weeks, and we don't want to do that, do we?
We absolutely don't, and project management is the key. It's where you make your profit or you lose your profit on a project. So you really have to know your onions. And I think the observation I would make is most property people don't actually know how to project manage. They don't know the order that things should come in, because that's critical in project management. And I know I was over in Cambridge recently, and I was looking at a project that David had been project managing. And what a fantastic project and finished project that he delivered on time and on budget. But if you don't know how to project manage, seriously either go research it and do it properly, or hire a professional project manager and observe them for the first couple of projects. It will save you the cost of their salary 3, 4, 5 times over, quite easily.
And just to take a simple thing, if you're just refurbishing a normal residential house or flat, and you've got the plasterers coming in to do the walls because it was all sort of bare brickwork, get them to do the kitchen and the bathroom first. Then they can move on to the other rooms and carry on doing their stuff, and the plumbers can come in and this kind of thing. So it's kind of simple things like that. There are lots and lots of processes, far too many to describe in this short outing that we have today, but that's the principle of it.
No, totally. Couldn't agree more. It's about having a production line and thinking about where all the different widgets are going to bolt on in that production line.
It is, absolutely so. And certainly there are people that we both know who do a lot of houses, and they have it like a conveyor belt. Totally. Their teams move from one to the other, and then different people will be in different houses at different times. Not just developers, but also people doing refurbs.
Mm-hmm.
We've reached another P.
Another P? Can I have a P, please, Bob? Do you remember Blockbusters?
I certainly do. He was a very nice fellow. I worked with him a couple of times at the BBC, not on that show because it was Channel 4, but a very,
Oh,
very nice
wow.
man. Very, very
Bob
nice man.
Holness,
Bob
wasn't it?
Holness. Yes, he was, yeah. Really nice guy. And not all the people you see on television are, but he was. He was one of the best.
No, he was lovely.
Now, P is also for property buyer.
Okay.
A person who
How is
buys.
a property buyer a strategy, David?
Well, a property buyer is a person who buys property. Now, you and I, in a sense, have been property buyers in our time, but this is a sort of professional thing where you would. It's often used. Well, it's used in two ways. It's used at the top end of the market for terribly rich people who are in the High Court or something all day long, earning I don't know £600 an hour. So they honestly haven't got the time to go around Chelsea looking at houses. So they will appoint someone to do this themselves. I think in America they call it buyer's agent. I believe that's the expression. And so at the high end there's that, and it makes sense actually, doesn't it? Really, that if the vendor has somebody working for them, why not the buyer have somebody working for them? And then these two guys between them can negotiate the price, because one would imagine that a property buyer is a better negotiator than somebody who's doing it for the first time that afternoon. And so you can see the advantages there, but equally in the area we work of property, if we're trying to build that portfolio, which we talked about on a previous video, then it might make sense not necessarily to have a property sourcer who has a lot of stuff that he or she offers out to people in an email list or something, or by ringing people up, but who actually goes out there armed with the criteria of what you want and actually digs stuff up, particularly stuff that is off market, stuff where you're not in competition either with other buyers at auction or with other buyers who've seen it online and are bidding at an estate agent or that kind of thing. People who can bring in for you direct to vendor deals.
And property buyers are very, very common in commercial, because a commercial agent will ordinarily act for a seller or looking for tenants for the owner of a property, but a commercial agent will also take an instruction to act to go and find sites. And recently somebody I help and provide consultancy to took that advice, and they have found themselves through a property agent who is a property buyer a property which is a very significant opportunity for them to make a good deal of profit from, add value to, and uplift the value. And the way they've worked with that commercial property buyer is they said, listen, I'm paying you this for a fee, which generally speaking is between 1 and 2% of the price of the property that you pay. And what I want you to do is negotiate that off the price of the property. So your fees doesn't cost me anything. Effectively, the seller has paid for that. So property buyers can be very good.
That reminds me of the old saying about consultants, that a consultant is someone who should, on a good day, manage to save you the cost of his or her fees.
Absolutely. And some more.
Indeed, absolutely. Otherwise, indeed, there wouldn't be any need in using such a person. So it's a kind of flippant thing, really, that consultants say of themselves rather modestly. P, now, we move on to property funds.
Ooh. I've got some funds in my pocket.
I haven't got any properties in my pockets because my pockets are not deep enough. But now, a way of investing in property is to use a professional fund manager who has a fund that invests in properties. And some of these funds are huge. We know that pension funds invest in property a lot, commercial properties mostly. And I think in the past it's mostly been investments in commercial. Now we've seen a bit of a change, and despite the fact that the yields might be low for some, with bank rates of return being historically low, suddenly those kind of 5 or 6% returns on property have become more attractive for investment funds, and so we've seen. Particularly, we've seen with students and with universities. We've seen in a lot of university towns, we've seen HMOs for students go out of business because the unis themselves have done deals with developers to build holes of residence out of thin air, as it were. This hasn't worked so well in the context of the pandemic at the time of recording this, because it's meant that students have been pressured to go back into that accommodation because there's a lot of money riding on it when their lectures are remote. Anyway, and being delivered online, and then they've found themselves isolated in their halls of residence. So there's a downside to these kinds of things. But on the whole, and funds have invested in flats for buy to let or something like this. They bought whole blocks and that kind of thing. So on the whole, it's probably a force for good. If you are thinking of investing in a fund, though, the upside is that it's completely passive, hands free. Should be. The downside, obviously, is that there will be management charges, and if those management charges are sufficiently high, compounding management charges in the opposite way to the way that compounding interest works can significantly over time, and with any investment class, eat into the real return that you get on your asset.
Well, I think you raise a good point there about the charges, but I think there's a couple of things also worth considering, and one is something which I've seen friends who've invested in funds get stuck with. At the moment, the property cycle is a little bit wobbly, and as a result, people who've invested in funds might have wanted to withdraw some of that money. As property is quite illiquid, the funds have had to close the doors to withdrawals because the reserve that they hold has not been sufficient for the run that they've had requesting the money to be returned. And what you'll often find is funds will invest in a diverse portfolio, but for argument's sake, they could have invested in the Into shopping centre, which has gone into administration. Now, if your money is in the fund that's invested in Into, all of a sudden it's evaporated. So that's not a really good thing for it in terms of if you need the cash, it's not as liquid as if it was in the bank. So bear that in mind. The other thing, a good friend of mine, Mr. Richard Bowser, he runs a fantastic trade magazine called Property Investor News, and they run a quarterly thing where they benchmark different property methods of investing in property directly, investing in the house builders, or investing in funds, and they compare and contrast that to shares and other asset classes. And their research has shown over the long term that funds have generally outperformed just going and buying an average property and holding an average property for yourself. The downside to that is if you are slightly more educated, and if you're watching this Great Property Meet YouTube channel, then you're clearly more educated, because we, David and I, and the other videos on this channel share a wealth of knowledge on how you can add significant value to a property. And if you're adding significant value, you don't see that reflected in the average returns of buying an average house in the market, because you've outperformed the market by buying that single property. So following in indices is okay, but you have to look at, are you just doing what the indices would do, or are you doing something different and adding significant value? So on that, David, we've reached the end of today's show again. That is terrible news. Everybody's going to have to wait till next time to find out our next P, aren't they? So, anything to say, David, before we say goodbye to everyone?
Just that I'm devastated really to have hit today's episode seems to have gone faster than normal, and I'm just getting into my stride here, so I'm as gutted as everyone to have to say goodbye, but go we must.
So sorry everyone, we look forward to seeing you soon. Drop us a comment below and tell us what you think. Tell us things that we've raised that you didn't know or you've learned from today, or what you're going to implement. And by all means, hit the share button, hit the subscribe and the like button, because we spend hundreds of hours putting this content together just for you, and I'd really appreciate it. And I know David does backflips when we get some likes, so if you want to see David doing backflips, hit that like button.
And we'll do that next week.
Absolutely. So it's goodbye from me, Andrew Roberts.
And a very goodbye from me too, David Clouter.